Oh, there's that sound. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the Pennypack Ecological Restoration Trust Zoom program tonight. My name is Kevin Roth. I'm the Director of Education and Outreach at the Trust, and it's my job to connect people and our volunteers with awesome programming like this and new people like Maggie. Um, so tonight you're here to listen to Understanding Soils for Better Land Management. And we're going to have Maggie here present to us in a minute. And Maggie is a soil and environmental scientist. She's originally from Ohio. She obtained a bachelor's degree in environmental science with a focus in soil science from Ohio State in 2019. And she's currently working on her master's in soil science. She moved to Pittsburgh in 2023 and has since taken a deep dive into understanding Pennsylvania's wide variety of soils. From coaching Vermont farmers on improving soil health to coaching the Ohio State soil judging team, Maggie has a wide variety of experience. Currently, she works as the Director of Research and Quality Assurance at PittMoss, a Pittsburgh-based peat-free potting and soil company. And she also works as a geomorphologist describing soils to help archaeologists find potential sites, which is really awesome and cool. All those different things are just so different and unique, which is I hope we hear more about those. And Maggie, she spends a lot of her free time sharing her soils knowledge as a volunteer trainee of the Pennsylvania Master Naturalist program, as well as through volunteering with the Penn State Master Gardener program. And that's how I learned about Maggie through the Pennsylvania Master Naturalist program. She did a great presentation for them, and it pretty much blew my mind. I did not know there was that much to know about soil, and I didn't know there was that much I didn't know about soil. So Maggie is going to fill us in on all those things that hopefully either whether you knew or didn't know about soil, and it can help you at your reforester plot, at your gardening, or just, everyday life. So, Maggie.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm actually going to talk very little about myself, but feel free to ask me questions at the end about the jobs that I've had or done or whatever. I'm going to share my screen just to get my presentation pulled up for you. All right, can everybody see that? We looking at my screen, my little Nancy Drew reference here? Okay,
I don't see
Not
it yet.
seeing anything.
let me see.
There we
Yeah,
go.
we do.
Okay. All right. It might just be kind of slow, so I apologize if there's a delay. Um, So I always start my talks with a little soil life lesson. Today's lesson is when you don't take care of yourself, you lose the parts of yourself that allow you to function in a healthy way. So these are images of tillage and erosion, a common story all across the United States when it comes to soil. Um, and something that I know that Pennypack is also very familiar with. You guys have some pretty well farmed lands, so I'm sure you're dealing with your own kind of soil loss problems that are historical in nature. So anyway, hello, my name is Margaret Cullinan. I am a soil scientist. You can call me Margaret or Maggie. I don't really care. I will respond to either one. Um, Kevin already covered the kind of about me portion, so I want to talk about soil. It is my favorite thing to talk about. There is always more to learn about soil. I always have a very hard time narrowing things down to talk about whenever I give presentations. So I apologize if this seems like it's a mile a minute. Um, you are welcome to type questions in the chat. Hopefully I see them. And MP and Kevin, if you see anything that should be brought to my attention kind of immediately, if somebody asks a real humdinger of a question, feel free to just interrupt me. Um, so we're going to talk about what are native soils, what types are present across Pennsylvania, how they form, how we understand them as individuals and across the landscape, and how your understanding of native soils can help inform your management decisions. So let's get rolling. But first, I always want to clarify like why even bother. I think in this group, I mean, a lot of you are volunteers, you're engaged in the environmental sciences or environmental disciplines in some way. So you kind of get it already. But people do say, like, why soils? And then I clutch my pearls and I say, what's wrong with you? But really, it has implications for a lot of things. It's got implications for land managers. It tells you what you can and cannot do on the land. Um, There are whole rating systems for various types of land management when it comes to the mapping of soils, just to help people understand what they can do with the soils that are on the land that they manage. It's got implications for cultural resources. So, as Kevin mentioned, one of the things that I do is I help archaeologists find archaeological sites, and that is by studying the pedologic record, otherwise known as the layers of soil that are on the ground. Um, a lot of people think that they should study geology if they want to find archaeological resources, but that's like way too old. Archaeology is people, and people have not been around here for that long when you're talking about geologic time. So it's all contained in the soil. And then also implications for nerds like me. This stuff is really cool, and I love it, and you should too. So that's my pitch. Hope you enjoy. So, what are native soils? These are all pictures of native soils that I have taken across the United States, across my career, mostly during soil judging contests, which is a very niche and fun activity if you've never heard of that. But these are from all across the United States. Let me see. Can you see my laser pointer? Okay.
Yes.
Great. So there's a little lag, so we'll just bear with me. Over here in the bottom left, this is Wisconsin. This is glacial outwash, very sandy soil. Right above that, I believe that's Illinois, classic plowed field. This is in also in Illinois, I believe, a great example of angular blocky soil structure. To the right, a glacial till soil, also from Wisconsin. Um, this one is a colluvial soil in Illinois again. And then down here is, I believe, North Dakota. This was a strip mined soil that had been restored following strip mining. So you can see, even though several of the contexts are the same, several of these are from cornfields, there is huge variability in the look and feel and color of native soils. And these are all uplands. We're not even into like wetlands or anything like that. What native soils are not is usually anything you buy in a bag or in a pot. These are called substrates. You can buy bulk topsoil or fill soil, but at that point, it's been so damaged and mixed up that I would even struggle to call it native soil anymore. So, really important to understand is that native soils are formed as a result of their environment, where they are, what they experience, and we'll go more in depth about that. They are unique to a place and time. Soils change over time as simply time passes, but also as the conditions that affect them change with time. And they're also variable based on both their composition and the processes that form them. So their environment contributes to the processes that alter them and weather them and give them many of their properties, but also their composition, what they're made of, affects their properties in a really intrinsic sort of way. So these are the soil orders of the United States. I don't want to get caught too much up in terminology, but if you decide to seek out more soils information, you're going to encounter these. Um, this is like, if we're talking about biological taxonomy, this is like, kingdom, phylum, all that. This is like the kingdom level. This is the most, the biggest umbrella. These are the biggest umbrellas in soil classification. There are 12 soil orders in total, but we actually do not have 12 in Pennsylvania. We really only have these four. So they are entosols, inceptisols, alphasols, and ultisols. And actually, kind of a bonus surprise fifth, which is technically not in the soil taxonomy keys yet, but it's the artisol. This has been under debate for years. These are soils that are so affected by human beings that they're getting their own sort of classification in our system. So here's a very brief overview about all of the soil types that we have, or not all of the soil types, all of these soil orders that we have in Pennsylvania. We've got our artisols. These are characterized by human influence. They have artifacts. It might be trash or pottery or metal, anything really. They're characterized by jumbling and deposition and all of the things that humans do to them. These are often urban soils, so modified beyond recognition. That is the dominant thing that governs how they function. Then we have our entisol. These are our least developed soils. doesn't always mean our youngest when we're talking about like nationwide. There are some entosols that are out in the desert that are older than the soils that we have here in Pennsylvania. But in Pennsylvania, because of our conditions, again, which I will go more into later, these are usually our youngest soils. So oftentimes you will encounter entosols in areas where depositional processes are occurring on a regular basis. So mostly floodplains. If you're thinking you get a flood, sediment deposits, boom, you've just got new soil. That's an entisol. Inceptisol is the next least developed. There is some petagenesis that's happened, and petagenesis is simply the process of soil formation. It is the process by which soils weather and change over time. They are slightly more developed than entisols. And then we have our alphasols. They have a characteristic alluvial horizon, and what that means is that over time, materials from higher up in the soil have moved down due to water. Um, so in for most alphasols, that diagnostic criteria is clay. Clay has moved down the profile and accumulated further down to the point that you get a discernible clay increase from the top to the subsoil. These are more fertile than altisols. And speaking of which, we also have altisols in Pennsylvania. These are very old soils. They lack fertility. They might be highly acidic, but the real thing to know about them is that they're old. So you might encounter some of these, and normally when you encounter these in like soil mapping terminology or classification terminology, you will actually just see that part of the word is present. So you might see a hapludult, and that last bit of that taxonomy, that word, tells you it's an altisol, or a hapludalph. So that's an alphasol. A hapludult is a altisol. So just something to chew on. So there is a ton of soil variability across Pennsylvania. This is a macro scale map, and you can see how intricate it is. Just even trying to paint with the broadest possible brush, this is a this is a complex map. Um, Pennsylvania has so many ecoregions, and that should be kind of familiar. Like if you've seen the ecoregion map before, it looks very similar to the soil map. And that is because the ways that these maps were developed and their criteria are fairly similar. So if we read the definition of how these maps were developed, we've got ecoregions are identified by analyzing the patterns and composition of biotic and abiotic phenomena that affect or reflect differences in ecosystem quality and integrity. These phenomena include geology, landforms, soils, vegetation, climate, land use, wildlife, and hydrology. And if we look at the factors determining soil formation and the things that define them, they are parent material, climate, biota, aka organisms, topography, and time. So very similar things going into informing these maps. Obviously, they line up pretty closely. If you understand the major differences between the ecoregions, you understand many of the factors that help create the general soils map of Pennsylvania. Like ecoregions, the general soils map only describes general truths about the soils in that region. So keep that in mind. Everything is different on a micro scale. In Pennsylvania specifically, the bedrock geology has influenced the relief of the landscape, and the ecosystems and soils reflect this fact. The ecosystems and soils of Pennsylvania have influenced each other in their development. So they kind of go back and forth determining what the soil properties are and then also like what vegetation is there. Obviously, the soils don't necessarily influence climate or relief so much, but the ecosystems and the soils are intricately intertwined. Across the state, climate is largely the same on a macro scale. So here's our general soil map again. We have specific regions across the state. So up towards the north, these are glaciated regions. This is where the glaciers came down and obliterated what was there and deposited a bunch of stuff as they receded, as they melted. Um, these are actually some of our youngest soils. They're around like 22,000 years old, um, which, yeah, just little babies, right? Then we have the oldest portion of the state in terms of soil age. We've got our sedimentary acidic regions and our sedimentary calcareous regions. So you can see the ridge and valley system in there. We've got those limestone valleys and those sandstone ridges. We've got shale in a lot of our sedimentary acidic part of the state, defining that those soil types. We've got an igneous intrusion down towards the southeast. Over here in the Piedmont, it's so variable. It is so different, depending on a lot of different things. There are some very young soils in the Piedmont, and it's actually a really interesting area where you guys are, and I'll talk some more about that. And then throughout the state, you'll kind of see these like cream lines. These are soils that are defined based on the fact that they are formed in alluvium, which is material deposited by rivers. So that's just a general overview of the soils of Pennsylvania. Um, but one of the things that I think really helps people understand soils, not just as entities, but also as ongoing processes, is the soil forming factors. So this was defined by Hans Jenny in 1941, and he said S is a function of Clert. It's that easy, folks. Just kidding. S is the soil state. So what the soil is like is a function of climate, living organisms. Some people will say the L belongs with the climate and then O is just for organisms because, necromass, dead things also contributes to the state of the soil, which, yeah, I can be persuaded. R is for relief, P is for parent material, and T is for time. So let's explore each one of these and their implications a little bit further. Climate includes the temperature and moisture conditions to which a soil is exposed. Excuse me. So you have two maps off to the right here. We've got our nationwide map of temperature regimes and our nationwide map of moisture regimes. Um, you can see that the whole state, pretty much, in both cases, is one thing. We are in a mesic temperature regime and we are in a eudic moisture regime, meaning that we're like in a temperate temperature regime and a fairly moist, humid moisture regime. So these are obviously macro scale concepts. If I tell you the climate is the same across Pennsylvania, um, Kevin and I were actually talking at the beginning of this, and he was like, "Oh, the weather's been great here." And I was like, "Not in Pittsburgh. It's been terrible." So obviously, these are generalities about the climate and what we experience on a, year over year basis. But there are microclimatic conditions to consider. So, for example, wetland conditions are wetter than the surrounding areas. Makes a lot of sense. North-facing slopes are shadier and cooler than south-facing slopes and moister oftentimes. Um, and another example of a microclimate, I planted gladiolus, they were only supposed to be hardy to like zone 7B or so under a dryer vent once, and they came back every single year because the dryer vent kept them warm enough to survive in zone 5. So microclimatic conditions do affect soils. And here's just that example about slope again. If we're looking at a south-facing slope, obviously that gets more sun exposure, so it stays warmer, whereas the north-facing slope stays cooler. There's less temperature variation overall, whereas the south-facing slope experiences that, daily increase and decrease in temperature. If we're talking east versus west, in the west, air temps are warmer by the time the sun hits, so it gets baked a little hotter. In the east, the morning sun hits it, so it stays a little cooler and gets protection from that western sun. So north-facing slopes are generally moister, shadier, and cooler, and that's important to consider if you're managing land, because different ecosystems will exist on different slopes, and the soil will reflect that as well. Living organisms, everything from microbiota to macroflora and fauna influence soil properties and vice versa. Um, Living organisms influence soil structure. So soils aggregate, they form aggregates over time. Um, Soils can also be destroyed by living organisms. We love to plow soils, generally not recommended, but we still do it. Um, Organic matter content is also influenced by soil living organisms. We've got deposition, so trees and other vegetation depositing organic matter, roots underground. As plants die, those become depositions of organic matter. Microbes convert organic matter, so they take it from, leaves and turn it into molecules, actually, large complex molecules that are then associated with the mineral portion of the clay that makes it persist for longer than just a leaf would in the soil. And they influence the chemical properties. Nutrient composition and turnover are all influenced by living organisms. So again, depositions of organic matter contributes nutrition, but at the same time, plants take nutrients from the soil. And we do too when we harvest our vegetation that we grow on the soil. We are actually removing nutrients from the system. So in these two pictures, you can see a couple examples of how vegetation has influenced soil development. In the top one, we've got an AP horizon, which is essentially a plowed horizon. P does not stand for plow. It stands for basically altered by humans in some way, but most of the time it's plowing. And you can see there's a very clear line, and that's the plow depth. That's as far as the plow goes. So it creates this very characteristic flat, straight line. And I bet if you were to dig into some of the soils at Pennypack where there has been historic cultivation for many years, you would see that characteristic straight line. It's actually really kind of neat to see in person because you're like, oh, wow, yeah, that is an AP horizon. Neat. In the bottom, we have spodic soil development. So these are spodosols that I saw in Wisconsin. Um, these are very particular soils. They are formed only under very specific conditions where the type of vegetation that grows, first of all, they have to be sandy. I should mention that. They're very coarse soils, and the type of vegetation that grows on them produces a lot of organic acids, and they form organomineral complexes in the soil. They take nutrients from up high, so they dissolve them. These organic acids dissolve some of these mineral components containing aluminum and iron, dissolve them, move them down in the profile, and then deposit them. And what you get is a characteristic, like thin black horizon, and then almost a white, a very pale horizon. And then you get a reddish dark um, horizon where those things have been deposited. So really cool, but it is specifically like coniferous vegetation that does that. There's also some vegetation like in Florida that makes that happen, but these spodosols, as they're called, are frequently found in like boreal forests. The next thing is relief. So relief is topography. Changes in slope, position, and curvature greatly influence soil development. Um, Topography determines how soil and water move. So if you've got a steeper slope, water is going to move more quickly off of it. Soil is going to move more quickly off of it as it's removed. Um, and there are some details to this. So the slope position is the location along the slope's anatomy. That's the top picture. And slope curvature is how the slope deviates from being flat if it does deviate. And both of these things influence how water and soil move across the slope. And I tend to get a lot of questions about like why they're called, these parts of the slope are called what they're called. So I tried to find some pictures that could demonstrate why these things are called what they're called. So you can see my shoulder, that is the shoulder slope. It's where it's the steepest part. It's the most eroded part of the slope. That's where it's convex. And then the foot slope is actually where it's concave. So this begins an area of accretion rather than erosion. As ever with soils, there is a macro scale and a micro scale. So simple slopes are just nice rolling hills, and you've probably seen these driving across Pennsylvania. And then I'm sure you've seen these, probably have had to climb across them when you're doing your reforester work. Complex slopes can have multiple kind of slope features within them. So you can have ledges that actually have a foot slope up higher on the slope. And they're just all kinds, there's deposition and erosion happening across multiple places on that slope. And obviously that would influence where soil ends up, where it leaves from and where it ends as it does its whole erosional process thing. Parent material is kind of an interesting concept. It is what the soil is made of, and that is a huge factor in how it appears and behaves. Parent material does not equal bedrock, but they are related concepts. So a soil may have multiple parent materials differing in their composition and origin in time and space. So to your right, this is a picture of a deceptively simple looking soil profile. I mean, it looks like you got a dark horizon and then, a lighter horizon and then maybe a brown horizon towards the bottom. This thing had so many horizons when you got into it because it was deposited by water over time. This was a river meander. It was also hill slope stuff moving down. Um, the parent material influences texture, structure, chemical composition, and properties. And so even within this one soil, we had a kind of like silty, high organic matter layer at the top. And as you got further down, you got this really coarse, like gravelly layer. And then as you went further down, you got this clay layer that was actually deposited as lake sediments. Just a really cool profile, but all so many different parent materials in this one profile, all contributing their different properties to how the soil functions in the present day. There is more than just bedrock as a parent material. So when we're going through them, again, half of this terminology is just so when you look at soil maps, which I'm hoping you will do at some point after this, you can read these words and know that you have come across them before. They are usually brand new to people. So it's all right if you've not seen these words before. Alluvium is sediment deposited by flowing water. So that was some of the parent material that was in that last profile that I showed you. Residuum is bedrock, which has weathered in place. So you can think residual. This kind of looks, some people call this diggable rock. It looks like it should be rock, and then you start poking at it and it kind of just crumbles. Colluvium is sediment that's been transported down a slope by gravity. So if you've got a steep slope and soil moves down it over time, which it always does, you will get colluvium towards the bottom of that slope. Aeolian deposits are sediment that are transported via wind. So this could be sand, this could be silt. If you've heard of loess, Loess, that is aeolian material. It's transported by wind. Glacial till, unsorted rocks and sediments deposited by glaciers. These are especially in the northwest and northeastern portions of Pennsylvania. We don't really have any. You don't have any at Pennypack, really. And then glacial outwash is water sorted sediments from glaciers. So the big difference between glacial till and glacial outwash is that glacial till is deposited. It's just all the junk that the glaciers leave behind as they move away, as they recede and melt. And then glacial outwash, as glaciers melt, there are rivers and channels that form through them, and then they pick up things along the way. They pick up sediments, and so those sediments become water. They can become sorted by the water as they settle out, as the water from the glacier moves out across the land. Alluvium, residuum, and colluvium are the big ones that we have in Pennsylvania. Those are the ones you'll see most often. So what does this look like in practice? This is a block diagram, which was basically a way for the soil scientists who mapped soils in the past to condense their knowledge and their mental model of the landscape into an easily understood format. I really like this block diagram because it clearly shows that soils kind of change as you go down the slope, but also it shows you the different parent materials present under these different soils. So up at the top, you've got residuum. Remember, that is bedrock that is weathered in place. So these are rocks that get exposed over time and they weather and they begin to crumble. And then you've got colluvium. So the residuum, those soils formed in residuum start to wash down slope and form a patch of colluvium. And then at the bottom, you've got the Susquehanna River in this particular diagram. And as the river floods, it deposits sediments on the banks, and that is alluvium. So just really cool. And you can see too that there are examples of bedrock in this block diagram. We've got sandstone up higher, um, creating residuum and colluvium. And then over to the right, we've got shale underlying the rest of this. And that is also creating its own colluvium residuum. So parent materials and bedrock are not the same, but they are related. So time, this is the last factor of soil formation in our little CLORPed formula. Time is one of the factors in determining the extent of weathering a soil has experienced. A soil could be younger than you. It could have been born literally yesterday. If somewhere flooded and had soil deposited, congratulations, it's an entisol. Um, Older soils are not always more weathered than younger ones. And I'll let you think of a reason why that might be just for a second. And then I'll tell you why. It's because not all climates are conducive to weathering. So I told you kind of at the top that there are soils in the deserts that are older than our soils, but are less weathered. And that's because they don't experience a lot of rainfall. They don't experience freeze thaw, which is a big process in soil formation. There are fewer living organisms to push roots through them, create chemicals that result in chemical weathering of the soil. So older soils and weathering are not always like, it's not always like a one-to-one thing. And then I actually love this picture. This is such a cool picture. If you're a soil scientist, because this is a classic cornfield in Ohio. And this is my friend Jeff, and he was out with my master's advisor digging soil pits for a soil judging contest. And the farmer told them, hey, there's some weird stuff over that hill about 6 feet down. And the soil judging pits only go to about 4 feet, 5 feet, depending on the contest. So they knew they weren't going to get that deep for the contest itself, but they really wanted to check it out. Because when a farmer says that there's something interesting going on in the soil in their field, you should definitely believe them. The people who know, who work the land, always know the soil. And in this case, this was at the margin. This was at the glacial margin. So where the glaciers had just kind of stopped in Ohio, in southeast Ohio. And you have a glacial till soil on top of this extremely orange soil. And this, I think they actually ended up classifying it as an oxisol. These are formed in tropical conditions. So this orange soil was formed back when Ohio was a tropical place and had been for millions of years. And then when the glaciers came, they obliterated most of that evidence in Ohio. But at this particular point, there was like a ridge. And Jeff and my advisor believe that the glaciers just kind of crested that ridge enough to deposit material, but not enough to actually kind of destroy it. So really cool, especially if you're, interested in the color orange and also soils. So the determination of the factors of soil formation was huge for soil science because it gave us the understanding that soils were a product of certain environmental factors which are quantifiable and predictable. And that allowed us to start mapping soils. You can really only make broad maps of things that you cannot see if there's some system to how those things actually come to be. Um, It still took a lot of digging and categorizing and classifying and describing on the part of the soil survey, but it did allow us to understand that there is a pattern to the way soils exist across the landscape. And as we'll see a little bit later, Pennypack is no exception. So when you look at the soils and the soil maps around Pennypack, you will see that there is a pattern to the way these things are on the landscape. So native soils in look, feel, and smell. Sometimes I get people that ask me, do you ever taste the soil? And the answer is a firm no. I don't do that. And you shouldn't either. There are a lot of people that will tell you you can, it's sweet or it's sour. Just don't. It's not worth it. There's too much stuff in there. So anyways, soils constantly experience petagenesis, which I touched on before. As a result of petagenesis, soils develop genetic horizons. Genetic horizons are related to one another and they help reveal the petagenic processes at play. So this is kind of a simplified diagram. You start with bedrock, and then things start to grow on it, rain falls, and then it degrades a little bit and it becomes the parent material for the soil that eventually forms on top and in that material. So as organic matter keeps being deposited and mixed into the soil over time by organisms, you get an A horizon that forms and a clear C horizon, which is that parent material over top of that bedrock. And then as things progress, more weathering happens, you get an A horizon, a B horizon, a C horizon, and your bedrock below. So that is just one example of how a soil might experience petagenesis over time, going from bedrock to a soil with a complete ABC horizon situation. But we talked all about, genetic horizons, they're related, whatever, but their soils are neither described nor classified based on their petagenic origin or genetic horizons. They are described based on one thing, and that is their morphology. That is what soils look like. And the reason for this is actually very smart. And that's because soil scientists love to argue. We love to debate things. And that means that there are always new theories evolving for how a soil came to be the way that it is. So if your classification system depended on understanding exactly how a soil it came to be, its current form, you'd be changing that thing all the time as new soils emerged. But what doesn't change is what they look like. So two soil scientists can describe the same soil profile and reach a pretty much the same classification. There are different forces shaping native soils, and they contribute to their morphology. So that's petagenesis. Petagenesis influences over time how soils look. Morphology is how soils appear to us, including, horizonation, texture, structure, color, coarse fragments, and depth. The things that I will touch on right now are these four: horizonation, texture, structure, and color. These are all things that you can go out and dig a hole and understand for yourself, at your own soil, within your own reforest or plot. And I would encourage you to do so. So this is like a standard soil horizon diagram that you might see, especially upon first exposure to soils information. You've got an O horizon, which is an organic horizon, which by the look at the stuff on this soil probably wouldn't even be occurring on this soil, but that's neither here nor there. We got your surface A horizon. A lot of people call that the topsoil. Got your subsoil B horizon, substratum sometimes is called the C, and then your bedrock, R horizon. Not all of these are present in all soils. In reality, most soils are a lot more complicated than that. They are intricate, they are not obvious, they are complex, and they have a lot going on. So in this one, I believe this one is from Hawaii. So we have an AB, a BC1, a BC2, a 2AB, a 2BWB, a 2BCB. So there's way more to it than just your A, B, C, R horizons. And these are just some of the soil. Actually, this might be all of them. I think it is all of the soil master horizons and subhorizon designations available to soil scientists when they describe soils. The good news is that only a few of them are actually relevant to where we are. When you're describing horizons, it involves analyzing, at minimum, depth, boundaries, texture, pH, consistency, and structure. All of these things must be described when you're describing your soil horizons, um, especially for the purposes of like a soil survey. In my work with archaeologists as a geomorphologist, I actually tend not to describe pH, but everything else will get described. So these are two profiles that I encountered during soil judging contests, and I've just kind of broken them out into where I would identify different horizons. There are some soils that I'm terrified to describe. If you looked at me and you said, Maggie, I need you to find the horizons in this soil profile, I would run away. So don't ask me to do it. Anyways, here are the master horizons that you might encounter in Pennsylvania. So we have an O horizon. This is primarily organic matter, such as forest detritus or peat moss. This may be in any stage of decay, but it's got to be a thick portion. If it's just like a little layer of leaves, typically that's not given a horizon designation when you're describing the soil. We've got an A horizon. This is a primarily mineral horizon with little or no rock structure, but it has a lot of organic matter or properties resulting from agriculture. We've got an E horizon, which is a mineral subsoil horizon leached of compounds, which gives soil color. These are really only found in undisturbed sites. They're very rare. A B horizon, which is the mineral subsoil horizon with little or no remaining rock structure and evidence of pedogenic development, such as alluviation. A C horizon, which is a mineral horizon showing virtually no pedogenic development. And then R is for rock. So up here, we've got our Lily soil series, AP horizon, BT1, BT2, and R. So we see it's got no O, no E, no C horizon, um, just A, B, and R. And then these are their sub-horizon distinctions that you might find as you're looking at soils information online. So D is for densic. It's very hard to dig and limiting to water flow and root growth. G is for glade. I don't know why they went with gley and not gray because glade is basically the same as gray. Anyway, it just indicates um, reduction of iron due to saturation. So it causes a gray color. P, I think of as people disturbed, plowed, pastured, other, usually agricultural, but most often it's a plowed horizon. R was rock, weathered or soft bedrock, diggable rock. R is for rock. This is like a CR horizon would be residuum. So that diggable rock that I was talking about. T, I think of as being for translocated clay. So the movement of clay down the profile over time. W is for weakly developed, and X is for fragipan. This is a brittle cemented soil that exists deeper in the profile and it inhibits root growth. And you do actually have some fragipans mapped at Pennypack, which I think is really interesting. So soil texture basics, these are the relative percentages of sand, silt, and clay. Clay particles being the smallest, silt being the second smallest, sand being the largest. You can actually determine these by feel, which we'll get to in a second, which is interesting. Soil texture is so important to understand because it influences many other soil chemical and physical and by extension biological properties. So it influences how water gets into the soil, how quickly it drains away from the soil, how much reactivity is in the soil. So does it retain nutrients? Does it have nutrients that it can hold on to? Nutrient retention, etc. These are two examples of very different soil textures. On the left, we have a very sandy soil with that classic AP horizon, by the way, in case you didn't clock that. Really very clear line. And then a more clayey soil. So this one is actually an alpha sol, I believe. Soil texture is the relative percentages of sand, silt, and clay found in a given soil or soil horizon, and the USDA soil textural triangle is used to determine the soil texture. So I want you to pay attention to the overpowering nature of clay. A lot of people tell me, oh, I've got clay soil. Usually it's like a silt loam or a silty clay loam or something, but it just clay, the way that it behaves, it tends to dominate the soil. So you can have a soil that is as little as 40% clay and it will just be called clay. That's the texture. As I mentioned before, you can determine this by feel, and I would really encourage you to go out and try this, and try it in multiple places where you think the soil texture might be different. You can send in a sample to Penn State if you want. It'll cost you 25 bucks per sample, or you could use your hands. And the long and short of it is that you get a chunk of soil in your hand, you get any rocks out of it, any roots, any leaves. And you crush up all of the aggregates that are in that soil and you squish it until it's basically Play-Doh or silly putty. And then you squeeze the soil to form a ribbon that sticks out over your hand. And the point at which that ribbon breaks under its own weight can tell you the soil texture. And you just follow this nifty little flow chart. And I actually did include a YouTube video with a really nice demonstration of the soil texture by feel method. Soil structure is also really important and it is related to soil texture. So it's how individual soil particles, the thing that makes up the soil texture, come together to form aggregates. Some structure types are more conducive to plant growth. So I'll give you a second to look at our different options here. We've got granular, blocky, lenticular, platy, wedge, prismatic, columnar, single grain, and massive. And I will tell you that our best ones for plant growth are granular and blocky. These are very common soil structures. In the middle, we've kind of got wedge, prismatic, single grain structure types. So granular is like what you like to see in your garden. It's just like little, like pea-sized or smaller granules of soil. Blocky is usually found lower down in the profile, subangular or angular, but they both allow for roots to penetrate. These other ones, wedge and prismatic, they form longer channels. So the roots have to go farther down. They can't do as much lateral movement. Single grain is basically like beach sand. So you can grow in it, but it's not going to hold on to very much, especially not water. And then stuff that is not conducive to plant growth, we've got lenticular, platy, columnar, and massive structure. So the things that you would actually encounter in Pennsylvania are really granular, blocky, platy, single grain, and massive. Platy happens when normally we see it most when compaction has been a problem over time. So driving, walking, if you go to a path and you take a soil sample, you will notice that the soil peels away in layers almost. It's got horizontal breaks in it. And plants cannot go through that. They can't get their roots through that. And then massive is just like Velveeta cheese. Nothing is getting through that. Water, roots, doesn't matter. Sometimes changes in soil structure and texture are easily visible. Other times, not so much. So the texture by feel method can give you a much more accurate idea of how soil texture changes at depth. And you can look with your eyes. When you dig a hole and you break the soil up into little aggregates, look at the structure as you do so. Soil color is another really great and easy way to understand your soil more. I want you to dig a hole and I want you to tell me what color it is. Browns and yellows are common for aerobic soils, meaning they get exposure to air. Darker browns and blacks often have more organic matter. Reds are usually more, they're like weathered a little further down, or they've got reddish bedrock. Grays, again, gley, that G horizon, or subhorizon distinction. Wet, prolonged saturation. These are usually anaerobic. They don't get air exposure. And orange and gray models usually indicate seasonal or periodic saturation followed by a period of drying. A mixture of colors all jumbled up often indicates fill soils. So you can learn a lot. There are times when I will poke a hole, pull that back up, and know exactly what I'm looking at just based on the colors that are in the soil. And here, these are all from the same farm, actually. This is a flower farm, and you've got some lovely aerobic soils to the right, and on the left, you can see a pretty glade soil here. This one was very wet. So that's what that looks like. We, as soil scientists, describe soil color using the Munsell soil color system. It is a hue value chroma system. So here I've got a soil sample in my hand that I would call 7.5 YR 4/6. You don't have to do this. That's just how we do it. It's kind of fun. Typically, there's not much to say as far as soil smell is concerned, but if you are in a wetland, there is a lot to say about it. Hydric soils are stinky. If you pull up a gray, mucky soil and it stinks, you're probably in a wetland, and that should give you a really good starting point for understanding what type of management should be done on that part of the land. So when you're reading the landscape, um, there are some general rules that you can use to understand it. Because time of development, climate, and living organisms are largely consistent within a localized area, relief and parent materials, in conjunction with hydrology, how water moves, tend to be what causes soils to vary within smaller areas. So typically, soils upslope are drier, shallower, paler. Soils at the bottom of slopes are deeper, wetter, and darker. Soils on hill slopes are likely formed in residuum or colluvium. Remember, that's diggable rock or stuff that's moved down slope due to gravity. And soils near rivers are more likely to be formed in alluvium. General rules, but you will find that they hold pretty true as you look across the landscape. Um, and soils change, as I said, in patterns across the landscape. And the arrangement of specific soil series down a slope is called a catena or a topo sequence. So predictable patterns, Katinas are one of them. This is an example from my area. We get our Guernsey up towards the top. This is a deeper summit soil. Then Culleoka on the shoulder. Weikert is really eroded on the back slope. Ernest down at the bottom is very deep. And then Atkins in the floodplain is both deep and gray and mucky. So why is all of this so important? Understanding the soil gives you pedologic and environmental context for your management decisions. So you can understand how the soil came to have its current properties, limitations to certain management goals, and best approaches to meet those management goals. So for example, a clear AP horizon and shallow degraded soil indicates long history of tillage. The soil was already on an erosional landform, because pretty much all of the soils in the Piedmont are on an erosional landform at this point, unless they're in a floodplain. But tillage exposed more rocks and eroded topsoil. So now you have context. You have an understanding of how that soil came to be just by looking at its properties. The extent of soil degradation allows for ready colonization by invasive species and limits establishment of more sensitive native species. So a lot of our invasive species are pioneer species. They readily colonize marginal soils, whereas our native species might like more particular conditions. So when you're trying to meet your management goals, which is to, I don't know, reforest it with more native species, you would go into that understanding that the tillage has degraded soil structure over time, exposing a fine soil texture to erosion risks. Therefore, planting larger plants and mulching well will be essential to management of invasives and erosion. Larger plants have a head start over the invasive species. They can also more quickly lock the soil into place with their roots. And mulching well also will help keep the soil where it needs to be and prevent weeds from, flying in from elsewhere, landing and germinating there. Also, I think it's important to point out that you live in a really unique place in the world. So I wanted to take a quick detour back to our general soil map. If we take a quick look at the geology map of Pennsylvania for your region, where Pennypack is located is in this mess of the Piedmont. And you can see all of these are the rock ages that are mapped here. That's the surface geology, so the layer closest to the surface. And you can see that they go all the way from the Quaternary period, which is that's what we're in right now. We're in the Quaternary, all the way back to the Precambrian. And if you look kind of where you are, you're like, oh, are we tertiary? Like, what are we? We lower Paleozoic? If you go into PA Geode, you can find your exact area. And the surface geology here is Precambrian. It is older than 541 million years, which is crazy. Um, but that means that very specific soils exist in this region. Um, I don't think of them like endangered species because they're really not. It's pretty hard for us to just obliterate them in the way that, endangered species can just kind of go away. But for example, this is the Californ soil series, and this is the only place in the United States. This particular little region, is the only place where this is mapped because just the right factors of soil formation all had to come together to create this particular soil in this particular region. You can see the little piece of it right over here that is mapped at Pennypack. So I think that's really interesting. Not everybody does, but we can do. So, as you may have realized by now, understanding soils means understanding the context in which they exist. Generalities only get us so far. So, let's talk a little bit more about specifics, and how you can use that to make better decisions. So, here is an area, Pennypack, Peak Woods. Um, so we've got some reforester areas over here. So if this is if one of you is on here that's reforesting this area, very good for you. Hopefully you'll get something out of this part. But I have also added the FEMA floodplain map to this. So you can see where a river runs through and the floodplain of that river. The blue and red striped area is the regulatory floodway. So it floods pretty frequently. And then the lighter blue is the 100-year floodplain. So if we look at the topographical map of this area, we can see it gives us a better understanding of what's going on here. We've got our river, and then we've got a very steep slope up to the Peak Woods. And when you look at this, you're like, oh, it makes a lot of sense now why it's called that. It's right at the top of this hill. And when we take a look at the soil map, we can very clearly see the katina concept that I was talking about earlier, the topo sequence. So starting at the bottom, we see some very gray glade soils. We've got some previous, like the way soils are mapped, they're mapped in map units is what they're called. Because soil maps are not like super detailed. They're not meant to get you to that square foot by square foot map. You can't look at a soil map and say, oh, the line goes here, therefore this soil stops here, and a new one starts right next to it. That's not how this works. They're just intended to give you an idea of what could be there based on the soil mapper's expertise. And within this floodplain, we've got some glade soils, we've got some fragipans, we've got some really cool stuff, deep soils, wet soils down in this floodplain area. As we move up the hill, we've got our Parker and Gladstone series. So we've got upland, mixed oath, heath, and oak pine woodland soils. There's an OE horizon on this one. So when I was reading more about the Parker soil series, it turns out that it's mostly just organic matter, like crammed into rocks, which is not very well reflected in the OE designation, but what are you going to do? And then you've got your Gladstone series as well. As we go further up, we continue to encounter the same soils. So they're on the back slope as well as on the summit. And then as you come down into a more gently sloping area, we've got Gladstone, Parker, as well as Annandale and Californ. So again, you can see that the soil properties from the bottom of the slope to the back slope and up towards a different sort of region change, and that's reflected in our soil mapping. So as I mentioned, soil maps are not exact. Are the maps still useful? Yes, absolutely. You can go out, you can get a map of an area of your interest and get to know the soil series that are mapped there and try to find them for yourself. And when you do this exercise, you become much more intimately acquainted because the soil maps include a lot of information about the types of rocks those things formed in, the vegetation classified on top of them, the different properties. So you can do a little bit of digging, pun intended, and really understand what's going on around you in context. Even though they can't tell you, oh, this soil exists right here, they can tell you, generally speaking, what's going on around you. And there is actually a phone app that you can get called Soil Web, I believe. Um, it is the same as the online application. It is also called Soil Web. And you can use that app on your phone and you can retrieve soils information for where you're standing as you use your phone. And that's really, really cool if you're out in the field. So in trying to understand a piece of land, I analyze a few things: texture, structure, compaction. I look at depth to evidence of saturation, usually via color, and the floodplain mapping. Soil texture, structure, and compaction give me an idea of how easily eroded a soil is going to be, how disturbed it's been in the past, and if I need to do anything to counteract that disturbance, especially in the case of compaction. Saturation is it's going to govern what species can go there. So when we select plants for a piece of land, we think about the drainage condition. How wet is it at times? And all of the time, actually. So does it experience prolonged saturation, seasonal saturation? Does it have a perched water table? Is it saturated where you wouldn't expect it to be, basically? And then I look at slope, drainage, pattern, landform. So again, slope, erosivity, how easily is this area going to erode? Where does the water go? What's the landform like? Because that's going to influence plant establishment. And then basic fertility is always a good idea to understand. Is your soil low in some kind of nutrient? What is the pH of that soil? That's also a major factor in vegetation and vegetation choices. A soil test through Penn State is $10 per sample. So usually it's very well worth it to try to just understand the picture of what's going on. And then looking at evidence of disturbance, type, extent, time since, how long has it been? How deeply was it disturbed? Is it fully just fill soil now, or just was it tilled for a while? What kind of recovery is needed here? And it's always important to touch on adaptation versus remediation. Home gardeners, when I talk to them, they want to solve all of their problems. They are fully willing to haul all of that soil out and bring new soil in, but that is not how ecosystem restoration works. So normally we're looking at or I'm sorry, not remediation. We're looking at adaptation techniques because adaptation is cost effective. It works around problems to save time, money, and labor, but it doesn't always mitigate problems for the future. They may remain, but remediation is intensive. You are solving those limiting factors. Sometimes, like in the case of contamination, solving that factor means removing the soil entirely, which is usually not what remediation professionals are, like soil ecosystem restoration professionals or volunteers are interested in doing. Because it can be expensive and it is thorough. So it does kind of get rid of your problem. And the last kind of thing I want to talk about is soil health. Just what is it, and what does it mean for you? Because soil health really is, um, it's geared more towards agriculture. But the general principles of soil health are that it supports a robust microbial ecosystem, it promotes water infiltration and retention, it resists erosion, the soil resists erosion by wind and water. Healthy soil allows root penetration and supports plant growth, retains nutrients, and contains lots of biodiversity. But for ecosystem restoration, when we're thinking about soil health, we want to support a robust native microbial ecosystem. So, what are the conditions for the microbes that we want here? Um, Promotes natural drainage patterns, reflects natural erosion patterns. It allows root penetration and supports native plant growth, retains nutrients sufficient for the native ecosystem. We're not talking about over fertilization with tons of compost every year. And it contains lots of native biodiversity. When I think about soil health for ecosystem restoration, you almost have to go visit a site that you're trying to replicate in a lot of ways. Or you have to understand deeply sort of what you're trying to accomplish these goals. Like, for example, a lot of people would think there are shale barrens in Pennsylvania. They are dry places, but they have vegetation that only exists in those areas. And a lot of people would look at those shale barrens and think there's no soil there, there's nothing even to be healthy. But when I think of the shale barrens and I think of soil health, I think what conditions of soil need to persist there so those species, that ecosystem can persist. And really, it means very little soil should be there. There should be erosion happening. There should be plenty of drainage. We're not talking about growing big green things there. We're talking about adapting our management of the soil to very specific conditions. But for the most part, soil health can be protected for a lot of things by following four principles that the NRCS sets out. And again, these are geared towards agriculture, but they can be tilted towards ecosystem restoration. Number one is minimize disturbance. This is tillage, digging, subsoiling, etc. Minimal disturbance protects soil structure, which allows for air and gas exchange, root movement, etc. It reduces erosion. It limits exposing seeds in the soil seed bank. There are a lot of reasons you do not want to constantly be digging. We want to maximize biodiversity as appropriate for that system. Again, for the context of ecosystem restoration, we're talking about minimizing invasive species as well. Maximum biodiversity in the context of ecosystem restoration creates a resilient soil ecosystem, and it promotes natural pathways of organism-influenced petagenesis. These things are really important to keeping the whole system going, because that's what it is. It's a whole system. Vegetation and soil work together. We want to maximize soil cover, again, where appropriate. This is living biomass, mulch, etc. Soil cover retains soil moisture as plants establish. It protects soil from erosion and it can keep weed seeds from taking root. It can also be used as a smothering technique. So I know one ecosystem restoration professional who uses 3 layers of cardboard and then like 3 inches of mulch because she just has, I forget what particular noxious weed it is. She's out in Washington, but that's what it takes. Is that natural to the ecosystem? No. Will it go away over time? Yes. And it does double duty of smothering the weeds that she wants to get rid of while also giving the plants that she's going to plant into that a boost in the form of organic matter and minimal competition because nothing can take root in all of that cardboard and mulch. And then finally, maximize living roots. Keep stuff growing. Living roots protect soil from erosion, provide food and habitat for microbes, and promote natural pathways of organism-influenced petagenesis. So when we have grasses growing, they have really fibrous roots that lock soil in place and protect it from wind erosion. When we have trees growing on rocky hillsides, they keep all of that in place so soil doesn't slump and become exposed and erode away. Living roots do a lot of the heavy lifting in keeping our soils where they are. In closing, oh, I didn't finish this slide. That's my bad. But the soil tells a story. By studying the soil's morphology, you can come to know its past. Understanding the soil's property can help guide your decision making and the choices that you make as you restore or protect that soil resource that you're in charge of guarding. So that's it. I hope you want to get your hands dirty now. This is another Nancy Drew reference, so don't think too hard about it. But I would love to answer your questions, both specific and otherwise. So lay them on me.
Thank you, Maggie. I loved all your references as a new dad. I love they were pretty much dad jokes. So
Yeah.
thank you for that.
hmm
We did have a couple questions, and I'll read
Great.
through those and see what then people can turn their mics on and ask some questions in person. But we'll
Sure.
start with Robin Eisman.
Mhm.
She said, "Are these XX codes from the USGS soil surveys available online? And if not, can you address those?"
Yeah, so
Can
like
I clarify? You showed a slide from Pennypack Trust,
mhm.
and I think those were actually from USGS surveys. And I think you partially answered the question that I was asking in the midst of you presenting the slide about how useful they were. But
So I'm
maybe you can,
assuming
yeah.
you're talking about like the soil maps.
Yes,
Okay,
yes.
let me. So these are available online. It's through the Web Soil Survey through from the NRCS. Everybody says look at the Web Soil Survey. I actually prefer a different resource. So if you go to the Web Soil Survey homepage, you can start it up by clicking that big green button, or you can go up to the search bar and type in a completely different address. This is for a resource called Soil Web. And Soil Web, when you first enter it, it takes you to a map of UC Davis. That's because that's where the tool was developed. But if you go up to the top left, if you want to select your location, you can. But I prefer to use the menu tool and manually enter a location. So once you do that, you can click Zoom to location, type in where you want to go. For this example, I was using Beechwood Boulevard in Pittsburgh. This is the Frick Environmental Center, but all you would do is type in the address, or you can put in latitude and longitude of a specific area, hit go, and then it will take you to that spot. So this took me to Beechwood Boulevard. These are the soils that are mapped there. And then you can click on any polygon to see the description of what's in that polygon. Again, these are approximate lines. Um, but once you click on something, it will tell you the soils that are there. And you can click on the soils to explore all of the soil information that is available for that particular soil. And it'll give you this cute little diagram. Up at the top, you see things like Soil Data Explorer, Series Extent Explorer, Description, and then all of these different properties that you can look at. Usually the description gives you a nice kind of overview of that soil. Um, but yeah, you can kind of look at anything you want. The application that I was using when I made those maps was actually um, it was soil data in Google Earth. So if you want to go down a rabbit hole, you can actually download that or, connect to, I think it is Soil Web still, but Soil Web has a Google Earth compatible data set. So that can be useful if you use Google Earth. If not, you can use Soil Web or the Web Soil Survey, which just requires a little bit more fiddling. You have to put an AOI in. It's kind of like a whole thing. It's an older tool. Soil Web is kind of like Google Maps for soils, which makes it a little more intuitive.
Just a real quick follow-up. It
Mhm.
seems to exist for the entire country. So is this based on actual sampling or
Yes. This was
induction?
a this was a major lift by the Natural Resources Conservation Service, which was formerly called the Soil Conservation Service, and the National Cooperative Soil Survey specifically. This whole discipline is only about 100 some years old. But back in like the 30s through the 50s, they made a real push towards soil mapping. And people went out with augers and shovels and they dug holes and they mapped soils. Obviously, I think they were, I forget. I actually work now. The other geomorphologist that I work with, she used to be a soil surveyor, and I think she said they would punch holes like I forget what it was, but they sampled very infrequently. But what they did was they looked at like stereographic maps with special viewers so they could see relief. This was before like, LiDAR satellite data, elevation data was available. But these people really understood the soils around them. They took a lot of samples, understood the soils in their area, and mapped them using relief data, experience, wisdom, and a lot of sampling. So it is available across the country. Some are more accurate than others, but we have been continuously improving them for almost 100 years now.
That's really cool. Wow, that's dedication. Anyway,
Mhm.
thank you, Robin. Great questions. Next question is from Greg, and he says, "What is subsoiling?"
Subsoiling is basically extremely deep tillage. So you will see this. Certain plows are designed to get really deep into the soil and basically turn it over, like moldboard plows, for example. But that is where some soils have what's called a DuraPan or plow pan, which is created by repeated tillage and compaction deeper in the soil over time, and it requires manual breaking up um, using subsoiling techniques. So deep tillage is essentially what subsoiling is.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Hope that answers your question, Greg. If you have a follow-up question, just let us know. I'll move on to Faith. Her question is, this question gets into mycology, but she's super curious.
Mhm.
Do you know how fungi abundance varies between different types of soils? She completed a project looking at the presence abundance of fungi in black mangroves in Florida, but she's curious how fungi abundance may change based on soil odor or texture. She might even go as far as asking which soil types are more easily colonized by invasive versus native fungi.
Honestly, that last question sounds like a really good thesis, or a dissertation. Honestly, that is a big question. I think it's hard to say generalities like that, in terms of what soil types can be more easily colonized, only because then you're getting you like it's like what fungi are we talking about? What, plants, like symbiotic relationships are we talking about? What grows there? Um, there are, there's fungi for everything, including every soil condition. And this is a really long way of me saying, I don't know. I have no idea if there are certain conditions that are more conducive to fungal growth than not. I would assume, with my conventional thinking, which is frequently incorrect, that soils that are more heavy in organic matter would more readily be colonized by fungi. But like I said, I mean, who's to say that I'm just not totally blind to a whole type of fungi that I'm not even thinking about?
And I think Faith, she's an incoming intern, so she's about to spend a lot of time here on the preserve. Do you have anything she could look into or something she should focus on, answer or help answer that question?
I mean, I would think looking into mycorrhizal relationships would be a good place to start. Um, and honestly, I would probably get in touch with somebody at like Penn State and see if they can answer that question for you, because there's got to be some sort of like, there's got to be some soil ecologist who studies this specifically. Um, like I said, there is always something new to learn about soil. And one of those things is that there's many types of soil scientists. I am a podologist by training, so I do a lot of soil classification and that sort of thing. But there are soil ecologists who fully study the soil microbiome, and what happens, like organismal relationships within the soil. And they would probably be really happy to answer that question.
Thank you, Maggie.
Mhm.
Sure. She appreciates your insight and suggestions. If anyone is into mycology, we are a side plug. We have a program. The Philadelphia Mycology Club is hosting a program here on the preserve. I think it's May 30th. The last, yeah, May 30th, Saturday, May 30th. So check our website. There's still some space available. Faith, just let us know. We can get you registered for that. Another cool program coming up. Uh, if you have any other questions, just now's your time to let us know. Either type them in the chat or hop in. But I would like to go to Maria Paula to see if she has um, anything to tie in about reforesters or any way to take this to the next level if you're interested.
Well, before I jump in, I see Grace has her hand up.
I didn't see that. Thank you. Go ahead, Grace.
Yeah, I was just wondering how quickly does the nature of the topsoil change when you change what you're doing on the land? Like when it goes from like a lawn to a garden or a farmland to lying fallow or something like that.
Yeah, that's a good question. Um, You'll hear that, 1 inch of topsoil takes 100 years to build, or, any iteration of that fact. Um, but it really does just depend. I mean, it can change pretty much instantly if something really catastrophic happens. I mean, if you clear cut a forest and then a big rainstorm comes, I mean, that topsoil is gone very quickly. At the same time, if you establish a grassland on what was once farmland, that soil will slowly get deeper and more organic rich over time. It can change fairly quickly. topsoil can develop within a person's lifetime, depending on what is planted there. But you also have to think of topsoil as a system that experiences both inputs and has outputs. So if you're thinking about like a lawn, for example, turf grasses, their roots don't go very deep. So they're not promoting topsoil development very deep in the profile at all. And organisms are always bringing organic matter down deeper into the profile, as well as water. Water is always moving it down, even though, the grass is contributing some thatch and organic matter on top. That stuff is getting removed fairly quickly. So there's always an in and an out happening. Even forest soils, a lot of our forest soils they don't have a lot of really deep organic matter. The topsoil is like that thick in a lot of them. It's very, very thin. And that's because they don't have nearly the same organic matter input that a grassland would. So kind of like a roundabout answer to your question, but it is kind of like it depends.
Thank you. Yeah, we got like some powerhouses here. Here's some like plant experts, bee experts, soil experts. So this is a
I
really
love it.
cool Zoom we got going here.
Mhm.
Thank you all for your questions. If you don't have any more, it doesn't seem like there are. Awesome. Thank you, Maggie, for your time. And I'm pretty sure Maggie, if we are interested, she has other topics and we could dive into any of these different things. So if you have any of that interest, let me or MP know and we can work with Maggie to get something else scheduled.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. I will say that like this was trying to cover the fundamentals of like soil morphology and understanding the landscape, but there's always more to understand. And Maria Paula, did you have anything that you wanted to say?
I'll just add in a few things that are relevant to reforesters. Oftentimes, um, Maggie touched on the topography, the slope of the preserve as being a factor in the soil type, the hydrology, and all that is factored in when we work with our horticulturalist, Chris Dartley, to plan out a tree planting. If we're down, a lot of you guys know Paper Mill Road, that rocky trail that goes down to the pond. At some point, you can follow down that slope. You get to the bottom, there's that toe slope. So all that soil is eroding down. You're getting wetter soils, what we call lowland, down there by the pond and along the floodplain of Pennypack Creek. So we're picking tree species for your plots if you're down by that area that are well adapted to handle those wetter soils. And in fact, if you were to look on the other side of the trail from the beaver pond or crossroads marsh as we call it, and you were to dig in those soils, you would see those gray soils, what's called the depleted matrix that Maggie showed lots of pictures of right there. And then if you just hike back up the hill to Overlook Woods, up Paper Mill Road, all of a sudden those soils are much drier. We're planting upland trees that can much more adapted to drier, well draining soils. You're seeing that iron, those rich red colors and the dark humus from the accumulated organic matter, because those leaves are decomposing and creating that nice top horizon. So all of this is that Maggie touched on is really relevant to even just the selection process of our trees, and then those trees you go on to take care of are adapted to those conditions. And so if any of this really piqued your interest, I highly encourage you to look more into soils, because there's all sorts of kind of rabbit holes you can go down that relate to the color and the texture. And it's just amazing that we all walk around on top of this soil, and we don't even think about what's under our feet and how it's shifted from like one part of our hike on the preserve to the other. So really encourage you to venture further.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's actually, I'm glad you like really put a fine point on it, because that's kind of what I was trying to get across is that like the soils influence the vegetation choice, but also over time, like the vegetation influences the soil. Like you said, the organic matter buildup, that changes the color of the soil as well. It is an exchange of things. And that's essential to petagenesis and understanding the land itself and why a lot of our ecosystems are the way that they are.
Ecology's neat. It's all connected. That's
Always.
awesome. Thank you, Maggie. We really appreciate your time. And like I said, if anyone has any questions, let us know. But hopefully this helps you manage your reforester plot a little better. You know, a little bit more about soil in general, or it helps you at your garden. Hopefully it's helpful to you. So thank you all for joining and what you do for the trust. And thank you, Maggie, for joining us.
Yeah, absolutely. And then on this last slide, I just have a few resources. I will send this your way. But just some easy to understand soils information and some a little bit more complex. This ecoregions document was actually really, really cool. When I first moved here, it kind of helped give me a better picture of things, and that ties in the vegetation as well. So that could be a good resource to share with folks.
And I will
And
share.
then please reach out to me if you have any questions, anybody. I'm happy to answer them.
Cool. I'll send out an email tomorrow with Maggie's contact information, recording of this presentation, and anything else, maybe this additional resources slide. So maybe those 3 things I can send out tomorrow. And I think that's all we have tonight. Everybody get home safe virtually, and we'll see you at the next one. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everybody.